Hello, and welcome to this lecture on optionals. Now, I've come across optionals a few times in this course already, and as you've probably guessed, I'm not a big fan of them. I find them a bit confusing. They're not necessarily hard, so you might find them okay, but for some reason I just find them a bit confusing, but you could pick them up straight away. So anyway, an optional then allows us to define a variable or variables really without crashing our code. So let's see an example of that. So we're going to declare a variable called number, and we're not going to give it a value, we're just going to make it an integer. Okay, so that's fine, that variable is now created, number, and it's going to contain an integer. But let's now do something like print that number, and let's see what happens here. And hopefully it'll come up with an error saying variable number used but never initialized. So it means that, yeah, we've created a variable, but there's actually no value in it, and now you're trying to print that value. So how can we get away with this error then? Well, after int, we can put a question mark, and that red error will hopefully then disappear, and it'll become a yellow error instead. So what that question mark really means is, it just means it will return a nil value. In fact, let's just give that a try, and see if it returns nil, and it does. So that question mark means that the variable might not necessarily have a value in it. So we've created the variable number, it's an integer, it might not necessarily have a value to it. So when we've printed it, it said nil. There's actually nothing in that thing there, in that variable there. So let's just delete that now then. We'll come back to that yellow warning in a moment. So let's say the user now, in our passcode example, has done something. So let's say var passcode field equals 1. So in our app, we're trying to log in. So our user's entered in the passcode field, they've entered 1. Now as you can see there, I've put 1 in speech marks, which makes it a string. Now the reason why is, when you're using your front end of your app, and you're entering something into something called a UI text field, it'll almost always certainly come out as a string, even if it's just numbers. So we've had to put it there as a string to make this realistic. But of course what we can do though, is we can now convert that into an integer. So let's do that. Let's say let login, shall we, equals, let passcode, in fact, equals int, and then of course we want to put in there the passcode field. So we're creating a new variable called passcode, and that basically is the passcode field converted into an integer. Let's now print the passcode and see what happens this time. And we've come up this time with this thing called, it's come up with 1 again, which is correct. So it's converted the string 1 into an integer 1, but it's now saying it is an optional. As we can see here, look, we've got some options to try and fix this. So first of all, the first option it provides is we can provide a default value to avoid this warning. So what does this actually mean then? Well, it's saying, look, I want to print passcode. Now passcode is a variable here, but there's actually not any guarantee that there's actually a value in here. Perhaps the user entered nothing into that field. So we can't convert it, therefore passcode is nil. Now you're trying to print passcode. So what we can do is we can provide a default value to avoid the warning. So if the user hasn't entered any data, it'll just say, well, 10 then, or a default value. We can use the bottom one here just to ignore the warning, or silence the warning. We can cast it as any. Or we can do something called force unwrap the value to avoid this warning. So let's just do that. So after passcode, we're going to put in this exclamation mark. And now that has disappeared, because what we're saying here is, look, don't worry Xcode, I know for certain that passcode now has a value, or definitely has a value. So when we run it again, rather than saying optional 1, it should just say 1. Because of course 1 is a real value, we've converted it to an integer, and we say, look Xcode, don't worry, passcode definitely contains a value, and that value is 1. So let's take it a bit further now then, and let's say we want to do some maths on that passcode. So we want to multiply by something, for example. I don't know why you'd want to do that, but let's just say in this example that's what we want to do. So let's create a new variable called login. And we're going to say, look, what I want to do is to passcode, I want to times that by 10. Let's see what happens here. In fact, nothing's going to happen because I've not spelled passcode correctly. Now let's see what happens, and we should get a red error warning, and this is the warning that I really want to show you. This is what this lecture is all about, really. It says value of optional type int must be unwrapped to a value of type int. So basically what this is saying is, look, you're asking me here to do a sum. You say, look, I want to multiply passcode by 10. But how do I actually know if passcode contains a value or not? So like we do with the print command up here, we need to force unwrap that variable. And if we do that, that basically says to Xcode, look, don't worry, I know for sure that passcode contains a value. So to do that, we'd put an exclamation mark in there. In fact, let's just run that code now, see what happens, and hopefully we should get a value of 10. And we haven't actually printed, have we? But over here, look, it's created a value of 10. So the user entered 1 as a string, we converted that to an integer, and we've now created a new variable saying, look, a variable called login, look, I want that passcode, which is now 1 as an integer, times by 10, and it does indeed equal 10. That works fine if the user has entered the digit 1. But let's say, for example, though, they entered the word 1, O-N-E. So what will happen now in this case? Let's try and run it again. And this time we're going to get something you never want to see, and that is a fatal error. And as you can see at the console at the bottom there, unexpectedly found nil while unwrapping an optional value. So look, we're saying here, look, in this login here, look, passcode times 10. And we've said, look, don't worry Xcode, I know for certain that passcode holds a value. But it doesn't, because of course it couldn't convert the word O-N-E, or 1, to an integer. So it's a nil value. So now this becomes nil times by 10, and therefore we get that fatal error. That's not good. Your app will fail, it'll crash, and users will stop using your apps. So you never want to come across this situation. So here is a challenge for you.